Hello everyone. Welcome back to Gelvin Valley for Farming Simulator 15, created by our friend Wild Wes. Still enjoying it, Wes. Thanks so much for creating a beautiful map. Oh, and that didn't do no good to crash into the back of me truck. Alright, we'll get rid of this monstrosity. Oh, I better be paying attention, because I'm almost full up, as in right now. Alright, let me get my truck. Come up here to take it. Last time I had to do a little jockeying around because it's on this crazy hill. There we go. Alright, we're loading up. Head back to the combine. Well, we are down to our final field for harvesting. Let me put the pipe away and we'll get her going again. One more field. We've had a dandy harvest of canola. I think I'm going to take another round here and then I'll start doing back and forth so I can harness the power of GPS maybe a little bit. Loving having our hillside combine back. It just fits on these hills and it's helping us get a higher yield, I'm sure. That is yet a mod maybe one day I'll make. I did, as I'm recording this, it's right after a U.S. holiday called Thanksgiving, and I did take time kind of over the holiday to work on another mod I know I've visited about, and at some point I'll share that with everyone in here. And what it has to do with is a donation trigger that I installed on the map for the church, kind of clear up at the top of the hill. And really, it's not so much for the game that we're having in here now. It's one problem, a player of Farming Sim can have is, what do you do at some point when you're just rolling in cash and have more of it than you know what to do with? It kind of takes away some of the fun of the game, if you will. So, and I remain convinced that that's kind of why the Giants had other placeables, a player could get, at least back in this era, just to have a place to park your money. Okay, so you have an extra $1.5 million, put up a windmill, whatever, and it'll pay you a little bit over time of miscellaneous income. I would be shocked if there was any player in the Farm Sim franchise history that ever recouped the cost of one of their windmills. When it's only giving just a little bit of cash each moment in game. So that's why I kind of think of it as a place to park cash. So that's kind of one thought of having a donation trigger up there on the church, is just if you have extra cash you can donate it and kind of make it just disappear all nice, neat, and tidy. I know my friend Russell has other ways of getting rid of cash. For example, I think he has shared when a vehicle gets stuck somewhere, and this would definitely be a map, where you could get a vehicle stuck many times over with all the ditches. But when that happens to him, he considers it a loss and has to rebuy the equipment rather than, working on getting it out of the ditch or whatever. So that's kind of a clever way to cost yourself money to take it up. But the reason I say this particular thing may not be applicable to this particular map is, well, as you can see with my cash, or rather the lack thereof, I don't have anything to donate. I'm running a loss. So I am hoping at some point to have some funds to share with the poor, but now isn't one of those times. So, but anyway, I'll share at some point kind of what I did. There was a whole bunch of hoopla I had to go through. It's mainly a Lua script and I'll show that a couple of them actually. And I mean, it involved another trigger put in the map for the player to walk into. I had to take the sample mod map Lua file, add some code in there, you know, and what I tried to do is to work it through the game's existing GUI, if I can put that, the graphical user interface, which is something I've never done before. So I wanted to kind of learn a little bit, so I had to make an extra XML file to make it work, and like I say, write two Lua files in order to get it all set up. So I'll share all that and bore you with it at some point, maybe someday, if and when I actually have some money in here to contribute. So I'm still kind of working on it too, you know, trying to figure out where all to take it, but I have it basically working to where you can type in how much you want to donate and it'll take your money. Alright, let's see here. You know, let me just continue on the round here, because I'm going to be needing to empty here again. So maybe what I'll do is get up to the top of the hill and I can start doing back and forth up here. I just want to make sure I make it all the way across before, so I don't have to drive my truck over the top of the crop. If that makes sense. So maybe, let me see here. I guess I don't have a, it's probably about alright. Like if I chose that, try to get a little bit different work width, make just a fuzz narrow, because I think I'm going to need that on the slope. And maybe before heading on out, I'm just going to empty what I have and we'll be done with it. Alright, empty. Let's get this dialed in. Actually, get that down. Here we go. Okay, hopefully this all works out. Well, something I wanted to visit about in this particular episode, it's actually a couple incidences that happened recently in our family. You know, the rite of passage that most of us enjoy in the Western nations that we grew up in is learning to drive a car. And maybe at some point, many of us, you know, have a fender bender or two while we are learning, or maybe it doesn't even happen. I know in my case, I fender bender waited until I was, 40, my particular age. But as we all know, it can be dangerous to get behind the wheel. There are things that happen on the roads, not all of which is our fault. There are obviously other drivers to deal with out there at the same time. And anyway, just one of those things we all need to be cognizant of as we grow up. You know, in my case, the U.S. or whatever, where we have the privilege of, you know, owning a car, learning to operate a car, some of those kinds of things. So one of my sons, and these are just kind of some weird random things. He works, you know, kind of in a downtown area, kind of in the industrial district, where he does some welding for a irrigation company. Now what the world? It left a little tuft of it there. I guess I didn't get it all. But anyway, one day he was driving to work, and this isn't exactly a fender bender, but as he was telling, actually he called us pretty much right away, but as he was driving along, Some guy, he said, made eye contact with him and chose to run right out in front of him. I mean, a crazy person. And there are people out there, sick individuals who choose to, unalive themselves, and they will do it kind of in this way where, they'll just jump out in front of a car, or they choose that way, which baffles me, to where they put it on your conscience for having run over them. So, like, it's sad enough, if someone feels they need to become unalive or whatever, why would they need to involve someone else, in the process? But they do. And so I don't know if that's, what was happening here in this particular instance with my son. I wasn't there. I didn't see it, so I don't know exactly kind of how it went down. I only have what he shared, kind of with me later on it. But yeah, I mean, there's some screwed up people out there, and this was just something that happened to him. And he said he never touched his truck, the guy that ran out in front of him. And so, of course, and I guess in talking to him, what would you do? The things that came to mind that I said, you should do is, because he looked in the rearview mirror, and the guy, he says, I never touched him, honest, but he ended up on the road, and he was, I don't know what he was doing. But there are people out there, too, that will fake getting hit just so, they could sue you and get insurance money. And if you don't have a dashboard camera or whatever to prove your innocence, you can get yourself in trouble. So I know what I shared with him is, you probably should have called the police. And I said, matter of fact, when I was talking to him over the phone, why don't you call them now? Tell them exactly what happened. Because I said, here's the thing. If this guy is doing this to random cars, odds are, other people are having it happen, and they're going to be calling in. So I said, the least you can do is call in, tell the police what's happening so they can go out there and deal with this guy. And if your report is matching up, with others, the consequences probably would be less, if somebody ends up hitting him. But, to just, and then obviously, if someone does hit someone on the road, the last thing they should do is leave the scene. I mean, that would be criminal. I think that's a crime. So I think he ended up doing the ad, and it all turned out okay, fortunately. I think except for the guy, I mean, you feel for some of these people. I think he was homeless. Don't know what his motivation was running out in front of my son. I'm sure he had his reasons, but he had apparently done the ad, as I suspected, to several other people coming through the area. So I really don't know what they did with him. Some of these people that are on the streets really, it's a whole topic on its own. You wonder, how did they get there? Do these people have family? I mean, surely they have family. Nobody comes from nothing. So, you wonder how you got there, and it isn't always the fault of the family. It's a lot of times the choice, of these people to be out there doing that. But many of them, there's something wrong with them, that maybe have a mental illness, need medication. And I know our government, in all its wisdom back in the day, chose to close down many of the institutions and facilities that would house some of these people. And I'm not sure what the reasoning was. I know that all costs money. Could be they wanted to save money. I think some of it was classic do-goodism. They wanted these people to feel normal, part of society, so they tried to mainline as many as they could. So some of that was going on. And I know one theory my father's mentioned, which seems even more sinister to me, is it's all about the money and the cost to society. They never publicly say this, it's just speculation. But it's so much, so they get it out, get them out of these institutions, close them up, stop the cost, and they say, you're going to survive or you're not. And the street ends up doing the dirty work of, these people then just passing because they're not able to take care of themselves. Seems terrible to even say that. I hope he's wrong on the ad, but you know what? It's probably not far from the truth. But I wish we had some of those places back so people like this could get some help instead of choosing to jump in front of cars. Anyway, that was one instance. And my son is high school age, this particular one. And so anytime, there's something like this that happens, it's classical case, with the young drivers, the bias in the system is always that, or pretty much always that the younger person is at fault. And they may not be. I remember a case, I'd have to look it up, but I don't even know if it's public anymore. This happened way back a long time ago. Where I had a cousin who was driving age. I was just a little kid at the time. But he and his brother were driving out in the fog, and they rounded a corner, and I think a head-on or at least driver's side hit and killed him. Took out one of my cousins, long before his time. I think he was 18 years old or whatever. And I seem to recall there was some allegation that he had done something wrong, and he hadn't. I almost think it came out later. It was heavy fog, but I don't think he cut any corners. But I think what came out later was the fella that ran into him, had had a few drinks. Well, that's his fault. He's an adult. He should know better. Well, and truth be told, my cousin was an adult too, but, just because you're the younger party, of course, doesn't mean you're in the wrong, as we would all know. But that's kind of what the bias is. But anyway, my son was headed to school one day in this little truck that we have for him. And he was, I think he drove past the main entrance of the school. There was a road that kind of came in perpendicular to where he was driving. And somebody just drove straight into him or close. And I'm trying to remember now if he hit the bumper, maybe. I'm trying to remember. I don't think it was just a basic little kiss between vehicles, if you will, if it was anything at all. And so I'm not sure I would have advised my son to do this, but this guy pulled, like I say, my son was driving by, and this guy pulled into the road right as my son was coming through, and basically almost or hit him just slightly. And he must have hit him just a little bit, because this guy, my son tells me he had to pretty much drive off the road because the other guy, he saw him coming and he had no place to go. And if he wouldn't have driven off the road, this other guy, it would have been worse. So I wouldn't have advised him to do this, but my son chose to follow the guy and chase him down. And of course the other guy tried to avoid him. Eventually he pulled over in a parking lot, and I think, that they we're supposed to exchange insurance information and all that. So they talked about it. It was an older guy. I don't remember how old he was, but he completely denied responsibility. My son was basically asking, what did you do? But It's kind of funny how we are when we are caught on something. When I say we, I mean people. Nobody, as a general rule, ever wants to admit they're in the wrong. It's just not part of our hardwiring. And I think it's just the inherent human pride or whatever, that we all picked up when the human race fell at the beginning. Where it's at, don't look at me, I'm not the one at fault, look at someone else, they are more wrong than me, whatever our attitude is. And so when we're called on it, when the evidence doesn't support that our innocence, maybe we bit by bit admit a few things here and there. And it was kind of comical listening to my son later. Eventually, the guy started by saying, "Oh, thanks for getting over," when he pulled right into the road. And it's like, my son told me, he says, I had to get off the road. He ran me off the road. That's basically, what happened. But to this guy here, his approach in denying responsibility was thank you for getting over for me. All the while saying he hadn't, caused an accident or anything. Well, eventually, as it continued talking, and maybe it was my son having somewhat of a clear head, the guy eventually apologized, to him for doing that, said he was in the wrong. And, he could have said that at the beginning, but that's why I say it's just the human being is such a fascinating creature. And I'm not trying to say I have everything figured out. I mean, some of this is just observing my own nature too, my own temptation. When I do something wrong, to figure out, hey, is there someone I can blame it on? Instead of just being a man and saying, yeah, I did it. My fault, I'm sorry. But it's not in our wiring to do that, especially, it seems, when we get older. And if you're dealing with a kid, the thought is, well, surely it must be the kid, that's at fault here. I mean, it wouldn't be me. Oh no, nothing to see here, keep moving. So my son is talking to him in a parking lot over near the school, and so they finished up their conversation, and I don't know where he was parked, but he said he saw some other car sitting kind of over the air, and my son didn't really think anything of it, so he and this other guy, they finish up their business or whatever, and he prepares to leave. And then this other car, it was just sitting there, drives up to my son, and it was another older person. I mean, really, this doesn't make those of us that are older look the best, if you want my opinion. But he cusses my son out and says, "Do you always park in the middle of the street?" And then he called him, a 7-letter word in English. It starts with an A. And then he just drove off. It's, the kind of people, it's just, who wants to be that guy, where you just throw a bomb at someone and then you hurry up and get out of there, lest they follow or ask you questions or hold you to account. To this day, my son still doesn't have any clue what was wrong with that other person. He said, I wasn't in the middle of the street. He said, we were in a parking lot. So, I don't know. Maybe this other guy, I don't know what kind of an establishment, they were parked in. Maybe it was a store and he was in another spot and he wanted to leave. Who knows what the situation was. And in that case, my son may not have it right entirely, because probably he had some adrenaline going trying to deal with the situation he was in. But yeah, so one other person shows up to kind of unload on him, call him a name, and then just zip off. And by then, it's my son. He didn't even have time to react, and that is probably a good thing. Maybe it's for the best. Someone like that just drives off when they're a jerk, and because who knows, what you'd otherwise be induced to say that all it does, of course, is get your blood pressure up, your dander up, and to what cause? It just seems like so many people anymore are just angry, and I don't know why. I mean, I could speculate on a number of reasons why, none of which I'm sure they would agree with or whatever, but, older folks, not your finest hour. You just take your frustration out on a kid, and I guess I gotta remember that too. We all have stressors during the day. That's the other thing that's hard to remember is, when someone does take it out on you, who knows, what they've been through. It's still no excuse, of course, but sometimes wonder what a person's been through in their day that would induce them to take their angst out on some other unsuspecting person. Truth be told, I know I've probably done it to people, not even know probably about it. Let me just man up and admit it. I know I have, and probably most of us have. So, but in sharing those two accounts, I am thankful, they turned out basically okay, and nobody was harmed, not even really the vehicle he was in beyond nominal scratches or whatever. And this is, once again, it's interesting where people get their philosophy, I go back to where my son almost hit somebody that jumped out in front of him. I remember when I went to college down to university, there was a guy I was with in the dorm, and he and I had breakfast in the morning a number of times together. And one of the things I noticed about him, there was a road that kind of came through campus. There was a lot of cars driving around the area, and he would just walk right out in front of cars, speeding through the air. And I finally asked him about it. I said, dude, why are you just walking out in front of these cars? I mean, they could crash into you or whatever. And he says, if they do that, I'll just sue them. And I just remember being dumbfounded. It's like, well, yeah, you could be dead, and maybe your family would sue him or whatever. But anyway, interesting how the human being comes to its conclusions, hey? And these days, by the way, whether it's my son or anyone else, I mean, I think it pays all the more to be uber polite on the road, at least in the nation that I'm in, So let's just say lots of people have guns, and when there's a lot of, if there's anger, irritation, you just never know. You never know what kind of a person you're going to encounter, right? So, and if you don't know if that person may have a weapon or do you serious harm, why would you try to irritate another person on the road or be anything other than polite if you have a face-to-face verbal encounter? I know YouTube is full of videos of such encounters going wrong, and people misjudging who the other person is that they're dealing with. So anyway, thankful he didn't have to deal with all that. Anywho, I'm probably going to be about half done with this field by the time we get through this episode. I'm just kind of looking up on the hill. I know the time is kind of moving on. At some point, we're going to have some buildings up here. I know we got some up there now. I want to install a sawmill at some point. The thing of it is, I need to make some money, to do that. I seem to recall the sawmill's about 150,000 to put in. But I have all those trees. I don't know if I can see them from here. See, there's kind of the old mill. Yeah, they're right kind of over the hill over here, down in the nook. There's our bell, which tells me I'm basically done. Yeah, I'll just finish one more stretch here across the field. And I've been waiting, trying to wait patiently for all those trees to mature and get to, I think it's 4 growth stages. So it's taken a long, long time. Feels like forever. I should have been planting probably a few more. It's cheap enough to plant trees. Should have planted some more. But I'm hoping I can earn kind of a goodly sum off of those. And I like to do some value added. You know, one of the things I've noticed is there is a mod for the sawmill, kind of like I mentioned. When I say sawmill, what it's going to do is it's going to turn it into board pallets. But in my mind, there is no sense turning it into board pallets if you don't get a little extra money for the value add. If all you're doing is earning the same amount that you otherwise would if you sold raw logs, well then why not sell the logs and, you know, earn way more quicker, if that makes sense. So I sense that's another little tweak to a mod that I made in here for when we sell palleted material to ensure that we earn a little bit more. Anywho, I'm just about full again. Thank you so much for coming along for the ride here as we continue our harvest of canola. We are almost done with the season, so I'm looking forward to the change of season here coming soon, where we can do our fall field work and recrop the fields. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Goodbye.